Namaskar. This is Dr. Omkar Bhatkar, and today I will be talking about the land of mystics, Bhakti period of India. An important landmark in the cultural history of ancient and medieval India was a silent revolution brought by about a galaxy of socio-religious spiritual reformers known as the Bhakti Movement. The movement was responsible for many worship practices followed today, be it the Kirtan at the Hindu temple, the Kavali at the Dargah, or the recitation of Gurubani in the Gurudwara, all derived from the Bhakti movement of the ancient and medieval India, which spanned for about 500 to 1700 century CE. A movement whose catalysts were Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Namdev, Tukaram, Akka Mahadevi, Kabir, and many other mystics. The rigid caste system, the complicated rituals that constituted the practice of worship, and the inherent need to move to a more fulfilling method of worship and salvation perhaps spurred the movement. Bhakti, as a way of invoking, appeasing, and seeking blessings of gods, may be traced to the Vedic culture, but it's only in the Bhagavad Gita, 100th century, that Bhakti as a mode of worshipping, surrendering, and reaching God gains prominence. In hindsight, however, it appears that the trigger lay in the 1st and the 2nd century CE, when, with the elevation and adoration of Gautam Buddha as a transcendent being, a supreme deity, idolatry set in the Southeast Asia, began the Bhakti of Buddha. There are Hindu devotional narratives of Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiv, and with the Vishnu Purana, with the Linga Purana, and with the Bhagavata. But then again, scholars may argue that on the ground, it is only in the 6th and the 7th century CE that Bhakti culture took concrete shape and started to spread widely across the Indian subcontinent. Well, it began in the south and it slowly moved upwards to the north. And for the first time in the Indian history, women cutting across caste and different economic strata of society made spectacular appearance in this mass movement. It is not to say that the spirituality or the search of God and search for answers to the deeper questions of life and reality had been the domain of men alone until the emergence of the Bhakti movement. No, it is not like that. In fact, centuries before Bhakti became popular, during the Upanishadic period, which is 500 to 400 BCE, we do come across women taking part on the path of knowledge, on the path of asceticism, on the path of Jnana Marg, but they are hardly remembered today. They were women who were giving up the pleasure and security of a married life, took to philosophical study and sadhana and a life of asceticism. They were called the Brahmavadinis, Gargi Vachakavi, Vadva Pratithaya. Sulabha, Maitreya, Rumasa, and Lopamudra were some of the notable, prominent Brahmavadinis during the Upanishadic period. The tradition of women taking part on spirituality, we gather gain momentum during the Mahavira's time, that is around 599 to 527 BCE. Indeed, he deserves also credit for bringing a large number of women into the spiritual fold. At the time, it is said, hundreds of women renounced their worldly life to become the Jain nuns. Chandana, Mahavira's aunt, is believed to have been the head of the Jain order of nuns. Years later, when Jainism split into two sects, namely Digambar and Shwetambar, the Digambars decreed that women could not attain nirvana. They barred the women from the order, but Shwetambars made no such distinction between men and women, aspirants, and admitted both into the order, a tradition that continues till date. As far as the Buddhism is concerned, one day Ananda, Buddha's cousin and constant companion, asked Buddha, "O Lord, tell me, are women capable of attaining nirvana?" Buddha said, Women are capable of attaining nirvana. With regard to nirvana, there is no difference between men and women. Thus, Ananda is believed to have asked Mahaprajapati Gautami, who happened to be Gautam Buddha's aunt, an ardent devotee, and who had a very keen interest in joining the Sangha, to go ahead with the initiation. And that is how, along with Mahaprajapati Gautami, 500 women are believed to have renounced worldly ties to undergo initiation and form the first Buddhist order of nuns, the Shakya Ditas, or daughters of the Shakya. It is then that Teri Gatha, the verses of elder nuns, was composed probably during the Buddha's years or after his death, and centuries later put into writing in Pali. Teri Gatha happens to be the world's most ancient writing by women. It was written in Pali language. But for several centuries thereafter, we hardly get to hear of women in the spiritual narratives of India. The Buddhist order of nuns pettered out for the lack of support. The Jain order of nuns survived on a small scale with a marginal presence. In the Hindu world, the voices of women were falling silent. Manu Dharmashastra, or Laws of Manu, which is written around in 100th century and was composed nearly 600 years after Buddha's passing and 700 years before the arrival of Shankaracharya. It is difficult to say with any certainty if the laws of Manu, which denied women along with Shudras the access to Brahmavidya or spiritual knowledge and condemned them to a life of submission in the name of Sri Dharma or wifely duties, was the cause of oppression for women. It could be that the text only reflected and strengthened the already existing and growing patriarchal trend that marginalized women's place in family and society. It is after the absence of women and various marginalized groups that there were some voices that were coming from the Indian subcontinent. And these were the voices of the Bhakti Movement, which began in the Tamil region around the 6th and the 17th century CE and achieved a great deal of popularity to the poems of Nayanars, the Vaishnavites and the Shaivite poets. As a social movement, the Bhakti movement in Karnataka and indeed everywhere in India challenged caste hierarchy, emphasized that the individual's direct connection to God and possibly of salvation for all through good deeds and simple living and devotion. As a literary movement, it liberated poetry from singing the praises of kings and introduced spiritual themes. From a style point of view, it introduced simple and accessible styles like vachanas in Kannada and other forms in various languages of literature and ended the hegemony of metrical forms. Between the 6th and the 9th century CE, there were notably over 300 poets and saints in the south alone, cutting across caste and gender, seeking and being with God. In neighboring Maharashtra, the Bhakti movement began in the late 13th century CE. Its proponents were known as the Varkaris. Amongst its most popular figures were Jnandev, Namdev, Tukaram, who have left behind many verses that embody the essence of bhakti. Tukaram was a rebel in more ways than one. Being from a lower caste, he was not allowed to write, yet he chose to write which was unacceptable to the upper caste, writing on religious matters in language of the people in Marathi. He was forced by the orthodoxy of the caste to throw away his manuscript into the river Indrayani. Legend has it that Tukaram undertook a fast to death, and after the 13th day, his sunken notebooks appeared from the river, undamaged. It was like the goddess Indrayani bringing back his writings to him and to the world. In northern India, from the 13th century and the 17th century, a large number of poets flourished who were all bhakti figures of considerable importance. At times speaking of a formless God, sometimes centering the devotion on a preferred god, Ishtadevta. These poets have left behind a considerable body of literature in Avdi, Bhojpuri, Punjabi, Maithili, and a number of languages. While Kabir and Ravidas and Nanak spoke of the formless God, the Nirgun Bhakti, there were saints like Mirabai from Rajasthan who composed and sung devotional songs in praise of Krishna in Saguna Bhakti. Mira's intense devotion to Krishna in defiance of patriarchal norms was a rebellious act. Her determination to be united with the Lord, she thought as a beloved, was a source of deep friction with her family. But Mira held steady nevertheless. The Bhakti movement empowered the underbelly of Indian society in fundamental ways and also provided the required impetus for the growth of vernacular literature. Then we move to the 16th century. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was an ascetic Hindu monk and a social reformer, a great proponent of loving devotion of God. With Bhakti Yoga, Chaitanya worshipped the Lord in the form of Krishna. Then Sri Ramanuja Acharya was an Indian philosopher and is recognized as the most important saint of the Sri Vaishnavism. Ramananda brought to North India what Ramanuja did in the South India. He raised his voice against the increasing formalism and the orthodoxy and found a new school of Vaishnavism based on gospel of love and devotion. Guru Nanak, the first Sikh Guru and the founder of Sikhism, too was a Nirguna Bhakti saint and social reformer. He was opposed to all distinctions of caste as well as religious rivalries and rituals. He preached the unity of God and condemned formalism. Guru Nanak's gospel proclaimed the equality of all beings and in all respect. The 16th and the 17th century continued to witness the rise of many religious reformers. The exponent of Rama Bhakti and Krishna Bhakti among the Vaishnava branched off into a number of sects and creeds. Tulsidas was a very great scholar and had made a profound study of Indian philosophy and literature. His great poem Ramcharitramanas, popularly called the Tulsi Krita Ramayana, is very popular among the devotees. But what exactly is Bhakti in short? In short, Bhakti is derived from the word root bhaj in Sanskrit, which means to be a part of. The English word devotion or love may come close to expressing bhakti, but is still inadequate to express the depth of the word bhakti, which is complex and deeply spiritual. To put it simply, bhakti means devotion or surrender to God. The path of bhakti is devotion and intense love of personal God, marked by Shravan, which is remembrance, Kirtan, which is praising the songs, singing songs of gods and goddesses, and Archana, worship. There is an intense yearning to be one with the divine, characterized by Viraha, that is separation, forlornness, that eventually ripens into Atmanivedan or absolute surrender and ends in the dissolution of relationship and realization of oneness. At this mood of lovelessness and the pining for union is generally characterized from a woman's point of view. For in the realm of bhakti, the feminine connotes the epitome of love and surrender. So it is not surprising that even the male bhaktas like Namalvars, Tukaram, Kabir, Basavanna took on the persona of women in their writings while expressing the agony of yearning, ecstasy. The path of bhakti is like walking on a razor's edge. You bleed out worldly ties, empty yourself of pride, power, and privilege. This act of giving up or renouncing samsara is an integral part of the conversion experience on the path of bhakti. But there have been mystics like Soirabai, Tukaram, Tsokamela, who lived the life of a householder and also practiced bhakti. But in their case, they were also detached from their ties of conjugal life and continued their incessant devotion to Lord Vitthal. The path of bhakti is a path of reaching the Almighty or surrendering. On this path, the battle is with the system as a whole, with notions of gender, caste, identity, family pressure, religion, masculinity, femininity, patriarchy. One has to move beyond such constructions of society and dissolve in bhakti. So Basavanna wants, don't you take on this thing called bhakti. Like a saw, it cuts when it goes, and it cuts when it comes. If you dip your hand with a cobra in the pitcher, will it let you go? In the same way, Meera laments, the wood burnt down to become coal, and the coal burnt down into ashes. But unfortunate me, I burned and became neither coal nor ashes. So what is on the other side of bhakti, on this bridge, once you have crossed it? Once you have crossed it, Akka Mahadevi describes it in her Vachanas as, I am a bhakti, but I cannot tell. There is a devotee and Lord. I don't know vows and rituals, or what even Anubhav means. I am a sarane, but there is no surrender, nor holding on to anything. The thought Sarnasati Lingapati does not exist. There is no separation. All that exists is one. So once the bridge is crossed, duality ends and living becomes an ineffable tale. Such is the path of bhakti. But how has it shaped the culture of India today and the fabric of Indian culture? So bhakti was a movement that puts us in touch with our divine beings. The movement aroused awakening among the Hindus and the Muslims regarding the futility of differences and mediators. The movement encouraged religious pluralism. Lal Ded from Kashmir brought together Sufism and Shaivism. A new religion, Sikhism, was born from the syncretic teaching of Islam and Hinduism. Guru Granth Sahib, the holy book of Sikhs, which was compiled later, included the message of saints belonging to different sects. The Bhakti saints preached through the medium of local language, which could be understood very easily by everyone. For instance, the language of Kabir was a mixture of several languages of everyday use. Surdas used bridge dialect. Goswami Tulsidas composed his works in Awadhi. Janabai used Marathi and Akkadevi used Kannada. In such a way, the Bhakti movement is a song of polyphonous voices, each trying to reach the divine on this path and have forgotten all material pursuits, all celebrating oneness. To sum it up, I could use the words of Soirabai. All the colors have merged into one. All the colors have merged into one. In the explosion of color, truth manifests. You and I lost our heads when we saw the Lord of Pandari. You and I lost our heads when we saw the Lord of Pandari. Differences have no role here. Lust and anger have been banished. Despite being in the colored body, I seek release. And as I looked at you, the distance disappeared.